Hold on. Hey guys, welcome to Wisdom in Torah Ministries. I am meeting with my friend Joe Halevi from Israel. He's going to give us some information on what is going on in the land right now. The latest in the whole mess that is happening in Israel due to the attacks of the terrorist group from Gaza. And we are also going to focus our time speaking about a topic that it's important for us to know the differences. Yesterday, I spoke in Spanish about whether or not the Jews in Israel are legitimate Jews, because there's a theory of the Kazakhs, the Khazarians, and many people within the Hebrew roots or following of Torah now, they are promoting that theory and the lie, because that has been proven over and over and over to be false. But some of the people on Facebook began to post a particular video of a ultra-Orthodox group who are actually friends of the Palestinians and endorse the Palestinians and accuse the government of doing illegal things. And I've known about this for a long time because I've been following Torah a while, and this seems to always come to the surface every so often, specifically with new people within less than 5 years in the Torah. They start studying stuff and they go in the direction of conspiracies and crazy topics on the side, and they stumble into this one, and they get a book by Kessler, who wrote the book in 1976 or 77, somewhere around there, and which the theory about the Khazarians being converted to Jews and they're not really Jews, and they went to Israel. It's a whole mess that is not true, actually. But many people don't know that. So what I've done, I call my friend in Israel, who's a Hebrew scholar. He's also he's been involved in projects with Haifa University, and also with some of the fragments of the Qumran scroll. And he's going to tell us about the situation in Israel today. And we're going to talk about this particular group and what they know about this group in Israel. So that way, it's not my opinion. He'll be the bad guy today. I'm sure he would love to be the bad guy today. So let me put the video on first. I want you to see the video. And then once you see the video, we'll open it up for the discussion here. But it is important that you understand this so we can have a better balance without speaking out of context, okay? This is the video, and I'll share right now. Make it a little bigger, you guys can see it.
Causing this conflict. The state of Israel does not represent all Jews, and certainly does not represent the Jewish religion. According to Jewish religion, all of this is criminal. All of this is forbidden. Basics of Jewish belief teaches that Jews are in a divinely decreed exile. We are even forbidden to create a sovereignty for ourselves. But especially when this is by killing, stealing, oppressing an entire people. This is not only criminal according to international law. This is a true violation of Judaism. And still, those people who choose not to follow Judaism misuse that very same religion to justify all those crimes forbidden in Judaism. The root cause is this criminal occupation, which is oppressing an entire people. We have to end this occupation in its entirety. If people will ask me my advice, the leaders of Israel should wake up tomorrow morning and step out of the Knesset and return the land back to the indigenous population. I guarantee peace.
Well, the level of stupidity and ignorance within a sect and a branch of Judaism, in this case, outside of mainstream Judaism. So it shows that indigenous people, okay, so many holes in that theory. So Joe, how are you, buddy? Come on in, let me get you in here so you can also be part of the conversation. Thank you for being here with me. Let's talk about that video for a minute. Let's have a conversation about what are people in Israel, especially within the religious circles, do when you hear this type of rhetoric?
Well, first of all, I have to clarify that my qualifications also are as an historian. And this is a subject I know very, very well. But I also know the background of why this man is making these preposterous claims, because I also went to yeshiva, so I know the ideology that sits behind this discussion. And I've met people like him. They are people who don't really exist in the real world. There's a whole background to this. It doesn't mean that they're stupid or something like that. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that there is a blinding ideology here that they have completely misunderstood, and the thing that they are trying to present here is a gross exaggeration of what things really are. But I've lost your video feed. I don't see you. There you are. Okay. So first of all, the situation here. We are, first of all, getting more and more information that Iran is part of what happened. The attack on the 7th of October was part of a much larger operation that I don't know if has imploded yet or not, but it did implode to some degree. I'm also hearing stories that a lot of these Hamas terrorists were actually cowards, but they also committed many atrocities, things that I just don't want to repeat here, because I don't know what kind of crowd we have watching this, but you can look online yourselves. This is all true. And also we're dealing with a lot of new Holocaust denial, people saying it never happened. And, it happened literally a week and a half ago, and people are already saying it didn't happen. So we're dealing with that a lot. And also what happened yesterday, actually, in my opinion, a very tragic event with the misfire by the Islamic Jihad that hit a hospital. It's been proven. Even the Russians admit, and the Russians are not on our side, even the Russians admit that they could actually corroborate the information and prove that it wasn't us. But again, it's a tragedy, because these are people who are in a hospital. It's not a simple thing. But we are also keeping an eye open also on the north. There's also rising concern regarding local Arabs. There are Arabs here in Israel that, even though they have all the benefits of living in a westernized country, they may decide to start attacking, and that's been a concern from the beginning. This has always been a concern. And if you go back to, for example, protocols that, for example, Benny Morris faked a lot of the information about this, so don't trust him at all. But the true protocols of what happened, for example, in the 60s and 70s with Ben Gurion, show that there was a concern. What do we do with the Arabs who live here? And there was an idea to maybe expel them, and the decision fell that they wouldn't do it because it wasn't fair, it wasn't appropriate, and also a concern regarding what other countries would say. Right now, there's a whole discussion about, should we go in to Gaza by foot? No, but it hasn't happened yet, and it's I don't know what's going on with that. The overall atmosphere is an atmosphere of, we want to win. We're not going to have a second Holocaust. This is why the State of Israel was created, and this is why the video you just showed is such an infuriating thing, because this man and people like him are willing to endanger other Jews because of some text in the Talmud that their rabbi decided to interpret for political reasons during the rise of Zionism and things like that. I mean, you can disagree with Zionism. I mean, there were people who disagree with Zionism, but never said don't come to the land of Israel. To such an extent that there are even stories that the Chafetz Chaim, very famous for his book on Lashon Hara, on speaking iniquity about people, he actually encouraged people back in the early 20th century to leave Europe. He said that he could sense that something dangerous was coming. Now, I'm very careful with stories like this, but there are people who who testified, when they were in the 50s and 60s and they met him, and they were already adults, that testified that he told them to leave, and he would say to them, "And Jerusalem will be a place of protection." He would warn them, "Leave."
So let me ask you a question real quick. So this particular anti-Zionist group, they come from a bad interpretation of their rabbi about what was going on during the time of the Zionist movement. And and I know that after the 1948, when the 47, when Israel returned to the land, even the Protestant church, they needed to reevaluate a whole bunch of stuff, because now the Jews are returning, and they're even in their eschatology, they have to change certain things, because now literally the Jews are returning, and they didn't know what to do. So the same thing happened within this particular branch of Judaism by misunderstanding this verses. So my question will be this to you. My question is, how are they seen, and what kind of level of respect do they have coming from Israel, and how much value is their understanding in the Jewish mindset?
They are here in Israel, they are a minority. But the group here in Israel is not the same as the group you see in the United States. So this group actually has a really weird history. It starts off in the 1920s, 1930s with, unfortunately, we share the same name, Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum of Satmar. So he's a head of an Eastern European Hasidic group from, I think it was Hungary. And in Hungary, and in many parts of Eastern Europe, there was a very strict ultra-Orthodox stance regarding the Reformed movement. I mean, Orthodoxy is actually a response to the German Reform movement and the Haskalah of the Haskalah movement, or Chochmat Israel movement in Eastern Europe, especially what we would call Russia today. And in Hungary, there was a particular movement that responded in a very strict manner, creating a very extreme uber ultra-Orthodox method that objected to anything from the outside world, to such an extent that they refuse to speak Hebrew. They submit to whatever country they're in, which is not a bad thing. I mean, if you live in a country, you have to accept the laws of the country you live in. But they basically shut themselves from the world. So that was the beginning of this. Now, the Satmar Rebbe, as they call him, wrote a book, Vayoel Moshe. It's a play on a verse of Vayoel Moshe Lashevet et Aish. Vayoel is actually a verb, but he took it to reference himself. And Moses agreed to sit with Jethro. And what he did is he wrote a commentary on a midrash which appears in the Talmud and appears again in Midrash Shir HaShirim, the midrash of the Song of Songs. And the origins of this is in Ktubot, Babylonian Talmud Ktubot, page 111a. And it talks about 3 oaths that God gave Israel. Remember, this is a midrash, so this is just someone's interpretation, and there's a background to this. But this is a midrash that says it takes a verse out of the Song of Songs. I have made you vow the daughters of Jerusalem if you were awakened the love. I'm paraphrasing. And what he means there is that the song itself is about, the verse itself, the context is, he has given an oath about telling the daughters of Jerusalem, don't tease me until the time for the love is appropriate. Now, what happens is that there's a midrash by Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina. It says there are 3 oaths that were given to Israel. One, that they would not go up as an army. They would, that they would not rebel against the nations. And then the 3rd oath is that the nations would not exaggerate, would not overburden Israel. Okay, So first of all, we have to understand that this is during a period where there was a struggle between the center in the land of Israel and the center in Babylon. Okay. And I wrote a whole paper about this when it relates to the calendar years ago. What was his name? It was Dr. David Piktovich or something. He had a weird name. I can't remember his name right now. A very tough professor. And what happened was that they were competing with one another. So there was a group in Babylon that had an interest to prevent people from moving to the land of Israel, because during the 2nd to around the 4th centuries to the Common Era, there were lots of people who lived in Babylon who wanted to become certified as rabbis, receive what's called smicha from the land of Israel, not from Babylon, because the community in Babylon at the time, the rabbis there were so-so, considered to be so-so. We don't really hear about a real serious center in Babylon for Torah study until around the 3rd century. That's an approximation. So when these rabbis started studying on their own in Babylon, they didn't want to lose students. So they started telling this myth about this midrash that it's forbidden to go to the land of Israel. However,
wow, that's crazy that it's about competition. It's not really about context of the Bible.
It was about competition. It was politics. There was a whole story about the calendar. There's a whole bunch of stuff that went on there. And then what happened was there was this particular rabbi called Rav Yehuda, if I remember correctly, that he was a big proponent of this, but his own students ignored him and went to the land of Israel. It says Talmideo de Rav Yehuda Shamtaihu. They abandoned him because of this. They got up and left and went to the land of Israel. So this is a midrash. Midrash, if I may use a Yiddish term, can be real or complete babkas. Okay? There's some wonderful terms in Yiddish and wonderful phrases they use in Yiddish, even though I never grew up with Yiddish. So I don't know.
And by the way, Joel, it's good that people recognize that midrash is just an opinion, and sometimes there's stories, and there are many things that even people follow on this side of the pond that are based on the midrash, and they don't know. Just the same arguments they have when they say Talmud. They have no idea that the Talmud is composed of also the Gemara, which are opinions on the Mishnah, and they misunderstand its context, and it creates a lot of problem of anti-Semitism because they don't understand how the writings work.
Well, the Talmud is also a lot of theoretical discussions. There's the stuff there that you have to remember. This is a discussion that went on in the end of antiquity there, and there's a lot of stuff there that if you don't understand the context of why these things were said, and context is not always the only thing, but if you don't understand the context of what's being said, you kind of lose the point of why it was said. So
yeah, keep talking. I'll be back. I'm right here, but just keep talking.
Okay, so I remember this really weird video that came out with this very snooty person who said, the Talmud allows pedophilia. This is an old video. And I'm like, no, it doesn't. It discusses the particulars of what is pedophilia and what is not. So, for example, if you take a book of law today and you go through it, a book of law defines the act of pedophilia, what is considered to be all these different things. I'm using this particular example because it's a hot topic these days. And so you'll see it's the same thing. It's a theoretical discussion. Now, obviously, there are people who would take laws in different places and say, well, technically I'm not breaking the law. I've seen these technicalities with Torah keepers, like, well, technically, listen, at the end of the day, if the Torah says don't do something, then don't do it. It's this attempt to kind of squeeze yourself into different places is sometimes very, very silly.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy when you look into this. By the way, really quickly, Joel, this is a book that helped me because you were born in Israel and you raised there, but I needed to study this to understand sometimes when I'm reading some things, even in the Mishnah, to know who the rabbis they're quoting are. Mm-hmm. And this is a book, I don't know, I'm sure you probably have it or you've seen it, The Encyclopedia of Talmudic Sages by Gershom Bader.
I have a different version of it. There's a version in Hebrew, but that's a very important book because
Tell us
the
about
book
this book because it'll really bring more clarity about what you're saying right now, the discussions.
Well, it's very important to understand that when you read the Talmud, one of the biggest issues that I had when I was in yeshiva, and I'm not saying I was the greatest scholar ever, but I actually have, and this is like a something I never really realized, but there's a particular rabbi who heard me teach multiple times and said, "You probably know more about rabbinic literature than sometimes some of these people who receive rabbinic or ordination, and all they know is like bits and pieces." So it was an interesting thing. A friend of mine claimed that was that rabbi ordaining me as a rabbi, but I don't accept it. But it was a very interesting thing, because when I was in yeshiva, one of the problems that we had is that they never taught us how to actually as a methodology study the Talmud. There's no method. Okay. One of the most important things is methodology. Do you know what you're reading here? So
Correct.
I ended up going to academia and I was taught methodology. So what do I know? Well, if I read a quote in the Talmud, say Babylonian Talmud by Rabbi X, I also need to sometimes check what Rabbi X said about this subject in other places as well. Why? Because the Talmud is built from multiple layers, and there are different rabbis, and there are interpretations to what these rabbis have said within the Talmud itself. Like, for example, I think it's like the first 4 pages, or is it the first chapter of the Tractate of Kiddushin, is not even from the Talmudic rabbis. It's from the Savoraim. It's from a latter stage within the development of the literature. So when you talk about the Talmud and you quote something from the Talmud, you better know where that material came from, why that rabbi said what he said, and does it track with other places where he says this,
Which is
or says
true,
something like this.
which is also true when we quote the first century writings. As you studied in academia, you have the New Testament, and sometimes people quote Luke and they quote Hebrews, and they are the whole bunch of years that went by, the events are different, the situation is different, and we need to understand how they connect, or whether there is a connection or not. And we don't do that because we're not really taught how to study the New Testament in a matter of a methodology, but it's basically to dogma.
This is true to anyone who has a dogma. This is true for Judaism. This is true for Christianity. This is true for Islam. You know, I've seen, I once saw a video, just recently, I saw this amazing video where someone actually shows that in the Quran, there's an internal contradiction that causes the Quran to basically self-implode. I'll try to find that video and send it to you, because it was, and this is a person quoting from the Quran itself. But for me, I'm saying this now as a scholar, for me, that's a gem. And that's a gem for me also anywhere I find this in literature, because you find internal contradictions, and then you realize, wait, is it possible that these different things were said in different periods under different circumstances?
Correct. So
Exactly.
then you have to understand the circumstance and the period, just like we started with the video, which is actually an interpretation of a circumstances in a particular period that's connected with what we have today. And that's why many people in the Hebrew roots now are taking, I'm talking specifically more in the Spanish world, not so much in the English, because we've been doing this long enough that a lot of the stuff have been like debunked anyway. So it's been kind of left alone. The people who only that are gravitated towards this type of rhetoric are the people who are coming in, that they're still dealing with replacement theology, and they're looking for an excuse not to be connected with anybody from the land. I'm accused of being too Jewish because I have you on, or because I do the Kabbalah Shabbat, or because I do, you know, some of the things that are more related to, to what Jewish people do.
But I mean, that's basically saying, well, you know, I'm just going to take just the text. I'm going to grab a Bible or something and say, this is my text. I have lots of books here, but I don't know where I put my Bible. It's funny. No, I was working on my bibliography today, so I have all these books out and not a Bible. And the thing is that, okay, great, you don't have to accept these practices because no one's forcing you. You can create your own. But please remember that if you create your own, there is no difference between what you created and what we practice as Jews.
Right.
Okay, this is all tradition of men, as I hear quite frequently when I discuss things with people, different people with all the different names that they come up with. And
You know, it's kind of interesting because when you start looking into the Torah and the duty of God towards the people of Israel, one of the arguments is, well, the people in Israel, they're not really, many of them are not following Torah. And I'm thinking, and I asked this to somebody, I said to them, wait a minute, when has Israel has ever been completely faithful to Torah? I mean, they get out of Egypt and they go to Mount Sinai and they immediately, 3,000 of them worship the golden calf. They go in the land of Israel, many of them worship the gods of the Canaanites. They assimilate themselves. I mean, does that mean that the covenant of God is by the way, Genesis 15, and this is something that's a little controversial to some people, but when you start studying ancient Near Eastern covenants, you know, because you studied it, and is that the covenant with Abraham in Genesis chapter 15 is based on the inheritance and descendants. The obedience as blessing comes later when the Torah is given on Mount Sinai. So meaning that the land and the people is based on the oath God made, regardless whether or not they were observant or not. Later on in the Torah, it tells you, if you disobey my commandments, I will scatter you. But I have to bring you back because I made a covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So you will repent, you will return to me somehow, some way, either through persecution or either through repentance, but I got to bring you back. And there's this consent, this is notion, Joel, that they think that if you're in the land, that God is not there unless everyone is following Torah perfectly. And as we know, Tel Aviv is not the most holy place there is, but there are certain people that follow Torah within, Tel Aviv. And that's why we have this rhetoric right now in the Spanish world more than the English right now, that immediately after the events of 2 weeks ago, immediately they started looking into, well, they're disobeying Torah. This is what happens for disobeying Torah. And that's besides the point. The more thing is that Hamas, a terrorist group, they're animals and they basically slaughter innocent people that were keeping Shabbat in their homes, people that were not observing Shabbat in a party, on Shabbat. They should have been keeping Sabbath clearly, but they weren't. And the whole point was that they got murdered. They got slaughtered. They got God's judgment comes in different ways. But what they did is something that is unspeakable and can never be allowed again. And what they're doing, Joel, they are using this video in particular, to attack the people of Israel. And that's creating more problems. And that creates more anti-Semitism. Even within the Torah community that are so immature right now, they don't really know how to manage certain information. And that's my perception of the whole thing. And it disappoints me because it's like hitting somebody when they're down. Well, that happened to you because you did this. Well, wait a minute. You're not God. God judges, not you. And right now we missed the picture that these guys came over the wall and they literally slaughter innocent people. It's devastating. And we need to at least inform the people that these videos do not represent truth. They're basically an interpretation taken out of context. So I want to thank you for coming in and willing to dialogue about it.
So there's a lot to unload here about this. So first of all, yes, as that guy, what is his name? Feldman? What's the name of this man?
Who?
That Satmar guy who's pro-Palestinian. The video you showed earlier.
Oh, that's Feldman.
Feldman. Okay.
Yeah.
So I have to say something. His rabbi, who insisted on keeping Torah and not coming to Israel, he fled to the United States. So he's a hypocrite, by the way, just before the Holocaust, and he told everyone to stay in Europe. So he was responsible for the death of hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions.
Wow.
Okay, because the idea behind it was like, oh yeah, we're just going to stay here. And there were rabbis in Europe, not all of them, but there were rabbis who said, this is our destiny, we're just going to die. Okay, this is how moronic the whole thing was. And there were plenty of rabbis who said, get up and run. Okay, and there were plenty of rabbis who did this as well. during the Holocaust itself, there were Jews who were religious and Jews who were not religious, and we have
Mhm.
records of people putting on tefillin and praying and keeping Passover and keeping Shabbat and fasting on Yom Kippurim, even within the camps.
Yeah,
You know,
that is true.
and the rabbi who married my grandparents, one of the first things he did, there were two things he did when he was a chaplain in the British Army. He was basically a rabbi. He did two things and I have his book. It's a very important thing in my family. He did two very important things when he came in the camp with the Allied forces. The first thing was to bury people and say Kaddish over them. The next thing was to marry people. There were couples who wanted to be married and restart the Jewish people, and that was the next thing that he did. Okay? And I have the privilege to say that he married my grandparents back in England in the 1940s. And the thing that has to be understood, that when a wrath like this comes to earth, it's irrelevant if you're a Torah keeper or not, because we all get sucked into it. Okay? So to make arguments like this and so on, how petty can you be to make such an argument? And this is why I wrote to you earlier. I said, I see unfortunately, with a lot of people who want to be Torah keepers, this deep psychological issue of identity. There's a crumbling of self-identity, and now everyone wants to be the special. Everyone wants to be unique. So what do? You point the flaws in someone else and try to emphasize yourself, which is petty. It's very,
Yeah.
very petty. And now, the same way this man in this video says, Israel doesn't represent all Jews. So first of all, he doesn't represent all Jews. The same way that whatever other group doesn't represent all Jews. And when he says Judaism doesn't allow it, based on what? Based on whom? He's talking when he uses this these grand statements. When you actually sit down with him and start debating with him, he would not actually have any answers. And I've seen this done. I literally saw an ultra-Orthodox man challenge people like him and tear them to pieces, not because they were smarter or anything, because what this group is saying, which is basically Satmar / Neturei Karta, and they're not really Neturei Karta. Neturei Karta was a completely different story with Blau in Jerusalem in the 1960s. These were people who actually were living in Israel. And by the way, this man is a hypocrite because his own people also live in the state of Israel. They refuse to recognize the state of Israel, but they live here. And when did their families come here? In the 1800s from Eastern Europe. So their excuse is, well, we were here before the creation of the state of Israel. Well, now, by living here within the state of Israel, you are implicit within what you claim the state of Israel is committing a crime.
No, and they're leaving, and they get benefits from the government of Israel too.
There are those who refuse. I have to say that there's a guy called, what is his name? Yoel, not Yoel Schwartz. Yoel Schwartz is completely different. Actually, the polar opposite of that guy. There's some guy called Yoel something. Many of them are called Yoel, which is kind of embarrassing for me because my name is Yoel. And when I used to work in the ultra-Orthodox area, all the Satmar was like, oh, there's a guy there called Yoel. He must be one of us, and I would make a point that I'm not. But some of them refuse to receive benefits. And if they have to have a doctor, they'll go to a private doctor and things like that, because medicine here in Israel is public. So everyone has medical care.
So let's talk a little bit about, on the same line, the Kessler's book, Cossacks, and the whole Khazarian mythology and theory.
So isn't Kessler's book a book called The 13th Tribe or something?
That's right. That's the one. Yeah.
So that's a book that I've seen many times. And I actually can add to that book something else. There's a man called Shlomo Sand who got kicked out of Israel because he's a real piece of work. He ran off to some college in England, and he has this book called When I Stopped Being a Jew or something like that. And he wanted to make some academic argument as an historian, but it's been torn to pieces. There's been multiple responses to what he wrote. So first of all, what is the Khazarian theory? So there was this legend. Okay, I'm starting off with a very, very important point. There is this myth that started within the Jewish world somewhere in the 11th century, I think it was, about a Jewish kingdom in the Khazarian region, which is basically part of former Soviet Union. It's one of these weird steep countries. They're strongly related to Mongolians and Asians and so on. So first of all, just to point out from a genetic standpoint, if Ashkenaz Jews were really descendants of Khazarians, you would have seen a completely different genetic makeup and a completely different look. These people were not stereotypical Mediterraneans. Now, if you look at the depiction of Israelites, let's start off with what we call Israelites, Canaanites, okay? When you look at the depiction of Israelite Canaanites, these are usually people who have anything from, for example, if we use the Egyptian art, these are usually people with black hair or dark brown hair, and they have blue eyes, just by the by. The Egyptians give us really wonderful depictions. And they have this crazy wavy hair. Sounds like I'm describing myself. I don't have blue eyes, but I have hazel eyes, but still. And you know, and they have anything from like a yellowish tone to their skin to kind of a brown. Okay. Now, when you look at depictions of Ashkenaz Jews in Christian art, and yes, I did study Christian art in medieval times, you find that they draw Jews as having big noses with a particular shape, darker skin, usually black hair, and this is consistent. Okay, so what happens is suddenly you look at European Jews and you say, but look, they have people who are blonde, people who are ginger, and so on. Yes, that's true. And the reason for that is because there are always converts, okay? There were always people converting into Judaism. There were people who are migrating from Italy into Germany, and that's where the Ashkenaz Jews really come from. They migrated from Italy into Germany, and then they also had a group from France, and they kind of spread from there onwards. That by the 13th century, we hear about Jews living also in the Eastern territories, what eventually becomes Eastern Europe, and then eventually Poland, Russia, and so on. They married local women, because many of these people who traveled were men who were single, and they traveled and they reached parts of Germany and they married these Germanic women. And there were also people who were Germanic and Slavic who converted to Judaism because they were exposed to Christianity. And we have to understand this is a period when parts of Europe were still pagan. And what happened was these people were exposed to Christianity and they're abandoning whatever gods they worship. And they look at Christianity and then they discover, well, the origins of Christianity is this other group. So they start migrating towards the Jews. Church fathers and church leaders were very, very concerned about this. We actually have literature about this. So yeah, sure, you'll have people who are of Ashkenaz descent who are extremely white, extremely fair. I've even seen people of Ashkenaz descent who are so fair they're almost see-through. That was one of the jokes that I had a friend like that was very, very, very white. So no one has any doubt that these people are probably descendants of converts, but it doesn't mean that all Ashkenaz Jews are from this group.
You know that they did a DNA testing on the different groups in those areas, and they found, because there's really no evidence of the Khazarian kingdom in language or in culture, has been pretty much in a mix with everything. But they did some DNA testing on the people in the area, and they found that Sephardic Jews and Ashkenazi Jews, they do have a connection, DNA similar connection. But then when they did DNA testing on some of the people in that area in question, there was no DNA connection with the local people. That's one of the proofs that we show.
That's why I say it's a myth. There was a myth. So this myth was also perpetuated by Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, no relation to me as far as I know, who wrote a book called the Kuzari, which is a dialogue, a classic philosophical dialogue form, where this rabbi ends up having a discussion with the Khazarian king. There was no kingdom, there's no evidence of a kingdom or anything. What we do know, this is the material that we do know, is that the upper echelon of this small group, of this particular culture, the upper echelon adopted some Jewish practices, okay? And this is when they talk about a king. They adopted some Jewish practices. So around the pagans and the Christians around them, they thought these people converted to Judaism. The kingdom itself was end up being conquered and dismantled. There was a small group of maybe several hundred people who ended up assimilating into parts of the Jewish world. Okay, that's where these people, this is probably what happened with this group. But Ashkenazi Jews are, besides the fact that before the Holocaust, if you actually look at pictures, and that this is all recorded, you can actually see photographs of Jews from Eastern Europe, which we find the most fairest Jews. Most of them were dark-skinned. Most of them did not look like Europeans. But what happened was, and this is what my father said to me years ago, because my father's a Holocaust researcher, he said, the reason you see mostly Ashkenazi Jews who are fair is because the dark ones were a much easier target to begin with. Okay, so it was easier to exterminate them. On the other hand, you had Jews who were fair-skinned, who were probably, without offending them, who probably had mixed genetic material in them, the ones that had the recessive gene of being blonde and fair and so on.
Right.
They survived because sometimes the Germans, the Nazis, could not tell them apart from everyone else.
Well,
But
true.
here's an interesting thing. For example, there are Roman writers who describe Jews, and they say, you know, Jews are not too different than Italians. But if you look at Italians, not everyone is from Rome. If you go up to the north of Italy, to Napoli and so on, you start seeing people that were much fairer and not as dark and so on.
They look like German. They look like Germans and Swiss. I've been there.
Exactly. So that's the thing, to start talking about someone because of a look and so on. Look, the Talmud itself says that sometimes women have children who are darker or lighter. Okay?
Yeah.
You have Hispanic people that come out very fair. Okay, so I've heard this term possible, that you have Hispanics who can pass for white people. Okay, because they're so fair.
I have a friend of mine who he's basically an expert in DNA research. He's a Spanish dude, and we were talking yesterday. Let me see if I find it here real quick. He on Facebook, he sent me. It's quite interesting, you know, like, and I did not know this, by the way. So I'm not trying to get into any theological arguments here. Basically, what it is with the audience, I just want to share what he shared with me. And I tell you what, it kind of, I think I ruffled some feathers yesterday because, as you know, there's what is called the Ephraimite movement. So I began to ask him about DNA. So what he did, he sent me. I'm going to show one for you here. I'm going to share the screen real quick so you guys can see it as I'm talking to you. So he shared with me this particular DNA. Let me move this out of the way so you guys can see.
The haplogroups,
yeah, the haplogroups, and this is like the Polish, right? And he's talking about certain haplogroups, and like, for example, in this book, Who is a Cohen, right here. I think you asked me about this one a long time ago. It talks about the J haplogroup, J1, J2 haplogroup, and P58. So they realized that the Semitic have a different haplogroup than the regular people, and the categories are based on letters and groups, different ethnic groups, right? Now, Ashkenazi is not an ethnic group. Ashkenazi is the name of a location that they lived, just like Sephardics, right?
Yeah, these are generalized terms. Ashkenaz is a name for Germany.
Right,
Sephardi
exactly.
is Sfarad, which is Spain.
Yeah, but people think they're ethnic groups instead of like a name for locations.
These are not ethnic groups, and it's more than that, because really, in truth, everyone from Spain all the way into Russia are all people that would have migrated from place to place. You actually have people from Spain or Greece, like myself, who ended up in Eastern Europe, but existed in their own communities.
Correct.
Then, for example, my great-grandparents, their community eventually, this is what we know, again, I can't say this is 100%, but this is what I know, they were overwhelmed by the Ashkenaz people who immigrated to their region, that then everyone got swept into Ashkenaz. So my
I know, right?
grandfather,
Yeah.
may he rest in peace, he died a long time ago. He died pretty young. My grandfather had Sephardi prayer books in his possession that he hid
Wow.
because there was a whole thing there of like, don't tell them we're not Ashkenaz. You know, it was a funny
So,
thing. Now today
the-
we laugh about it, but back then, if there's a complication about how Jewish communities work. I'm not going to go into it right now, but for me it's a funny piece of history, because
gotcha.
where I live, people marry with one another. Sephardim with Ashkenazim, with Eastern, with North Africa, and everything.
They're everywhere.
We don't have that here.
Let me follow this. So what happens is they have the Polish Jews, right? And the Polish people, they have different haplogroup. Here is like RM269, right? Then you move on to the next one. You have the E1B, basically is a lot of the Arab people. They have the E groups, right? Then you go into the Germanic language area. They have different groups, right? So what happens is in Latin America, J1. The J1 is actually Semitic. A lot of the Semitic people have J1. Okay. So when they went, and you find them in Spain, Belarus, what you just saying, Ukraine, Belarus, Spain, Ukraine, everywhere, Mexico, Spain,
yeah,
right?
because the number, we have to understand the history of the Spanish Inquisition. Many of the people who were expelled from Spain were not practicing Jews. These were people who converted to Christianity. The Spanish Jews had a really weird history. And one of the weird things that they did was many of them converted to Christianity to benefit from the church. But then eventually they were accused of being usurpers within the church. And those were the ones who were expelled. So the Jews who carried on being Jewish just end up leaving Spain and going into Europe and North Africa.
So check this out.
Yeah.
So what DNA is Latin America? Let me share this. This is quick research. I just went on the internet because I already knew about this, but for the sake of what we're doing. So there's a movement, right, in which I agree with the restoration of 12 tribes of Israel. You know I agree with that. Okay. And I have to reevaluate certain positions because I got more information. So all of a sudden, just a quick thing, right? This is from Native American ancestry. They ask, what is the DNA of Latin America? Who are Latin America descending from? Americans descending from, right? It tells you some of them from Sahara, Africans, and Europeans, because it's a mixture of people, right? Says what haplogroup are Cubans?
It's important to say that sub-Saharan doesn't mean black.
No, exactly, that's true.
So when people talk about Africa, everyone thinks about black, but
that's not,
North Africa is not black.
That's true. So check this out. From Cubans, let's talk about just Cubans. It says, among the Western Eurasian fraction, the vast majority of individuals belong to West European haplogroup R1b, which for a while people were saying that was a Jewish lineage, but now we're finding out that it's not. It says the African lineage found in Cubans have a Western haplogroup, which is E1, E2, E1b1a, and Northern has a different haplogroup. Okay, Spanish says here, what are the haplogroups, right? It says R or J points. It's interesting that the J haplogroup are all the Jews have migrated in the Spanish Inquisition that are Jewish people to come this way. So now, what's interesting is when you look into what do most Mexicans have, and they say it's actually, it doesn't have it over here, but I saw it earlier. It's a Q, it's Q, Mesoamerican. They're basically a Q group, which is completely, they're Gentiles. They're not really descendants of the Jewish people. So wait. I know where you're going. So that means that now we have people.
It's good to laugh a little bit right now.
The Bible says that we are grafted in. I believe that 100%, that the people are grafted into the Commonwealth of Israel, not the religion of Judaism. I understand that too. We're not going to be recognized as part of the 12 tribes right now. I find that too. But I do believe 100% that people who believe in the God of Israel, we are grafted in. But there are people who are claiming, and I used to be one of those, because back in when you met me in 2004, 5, and 6, I was not doing this type of research. So I came to the realization in 2008 and 9, when I did my research on the loss of adoption, that I'm thinking, wait, if all these Christians are the lost tribes of Israel, then why would need to be adopted? So why would need to be grafted in? So what I finally realized is I do believe that they are lost tribes. And you know that in the Silk Roads, they are descendants of the Pashtun tribe, and all the things that you can tell that, they're descendants of the Hebrew people.
Pashtun, we have to be very careful with. I actually spoke with someone who's a Pashtun, and he actually looked into this, and he said that it's clear the Pashtun and people like that have a Middle Eastern genetic group, but he said that there's no real evidence that these are.
But there is evidence of some that
Israel.
That they understand there's a tradition, that they understand where they come from. So there's a tradition. There's some customs about that. And you have the Silk Roads, in which a lot of the people will go in that direction. And I'm not saying that the 10 tribes are not real, because they are. The restoration of Israel will happen. The 12 tribes will be regathered. I get it. But for some reason, we have a disconnection between what really happened to those 10 tribes. And during the time of the Babylonian captivity, we know that Judah came back, only a remnant, not all of them came back. And the 10 tribes.
It's actually much more complicated than that.
Well, let's make it simple for the audience.
But there's a misconception. The term Jews doesn't mean that we're necessarily from Judah.
No, I understand.
Me a Jew, but
that.
I'm a Levite. But no, Oded Lifshitz proved without a doubt that the land was not empty. The only area that was emptied out was an area around Judea. The 10 tribes, many parts of them were still living here. So the whole thing with, for example, in the New Testament, where they talk about, can anything good come out of the Galilee? There's a reason for this, because the Galileans belong to a completely different Torah tradition than the Judeans, because they belong to the 10 tribes. So they didn't accept the Torah interpretation and methodology of the Judeans. So when Yeshua shows up in Jerusalem, even though he actually was a Judean according to the genealogy in Matthew, the reality was that they looked and said, "Oh, he's from the Galilee. We don't deal with these guys. They're not really one of us, or they're not. They're beneath us. They're one of us, but they're beneath us."
It's like the Samaritans today, which they don't.
Thing with the Samaritans, exactly. Samaritans are descendants. The Samaritans are descendants of the 10 tribes. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And by the way, when you look at them, some of them look like Israeli Jews, and some of them look like more like Arabs, and it's because it's a mixed bag.
Right. Well, they've been from the beginning. I mean, when some of the people from the 10 tribes were carried away, they actually sent some Assyrians to Israel to mix within the local people. So it was more of the elite that was taken away, not the regular folks.
Exactly. And it was only very particular groups that were sitting in very particular places.
Right.
But
wait a minute. The point that I was trying to make was that now we take some of the history without looking at the whole history, which there was the remnant of Israel, the 10 tribes that stayed behind. The elite went away, and then later on, a full exile at some point or another. People were out, and then they got scattered throughout the Persians, and then Greco-Roman and the Greeks or whatever. So they went into Europe. So I do agree that there may be people, descendants of the 10 tribes, that are scattered abroad. I'm not disregarding that. What I'm saying is that not every Christian is a lost scattered of the 10 tribes. And I used to believe that back in 99, 2000, 2001, and I needed to reevaluate the information based on biblical context. So this is my point. My point is that if that was true, then the majority of the Spanish-speaking people who are claiming to be Ephraim or the 10 tribes, they should be able to also prove it with genealogy, because we already said that the Ashkenazi Jews, they have the markers and the connection with the Sephardics, but they don't have the connection with the Kazakhs. So we can have it both ways. If we are saying the Jews in the land, they have a descendants of Jewish people from Europe and whatever, and people from Iraq and Iran and Africa and all that stuff that can prove they have descendants of Jewish people, then we cannot say that the Jews in Israel are not Jews when they have the markers, because DNA doesn't lie. It's just like math. Math is truth, because whatever happens, you can't change it. Well, DNA is the same way. So if we are claiming to be the 10 tribes, which I have no doubt that they are descendants of the 10 tribes scattered all over the world, I have no doubt. but doesn't mean that every person that comes into the Torah that is in the church is actually part of the lost tribes of children of Israel. And that's my point, to be honest with the research, because then how come the genealogy from Mexicans, comes up with a particular haplogroup, as well as people from South America, and that DNA structure is the same haplogroup as the Asians in Upper China, and because it went through Alaska and the migration back in the day. We have to be honest with the research without minimizing God's prophetic prophetic call to restoration. Because I do believe that the blessing to Abraham, Joel, was that in you all the nations of the earth will be blessed. But why we have to fight for an identity, like you said, that we cannot really prove through DNA, but we have the access to be part of the Commonwealth through Yeshua without having to fight and point the finger that they don't belong, when they can turn around and say, well, wait a minute, we have the DNA that proves who we are. Who are you? And that was, to me, a huge wake-up call. It's like, I better educate myself, because then someone can point out and said, you are usurping, and then pointing the finger to other people. And we have to be careful. And I know this is not a very popular message, but it's an honest assertion of the information that we have at hand.
Yeah, and the honesty is very important. It's like someone I met years ago that came to me with like this prophetic attitude. He said, I'm just telling you the truth. Okay, fine. It's the same thing here. The same zeal that you have for the truth. How about using that same zeal and actually looking at things in a truthful way? I have a friend, a very, very good friend, who's like family to me, that when he heard, he lives in the United States, and he was in one of these assemblies for Sukkot. So he's a Jewish man from New York who eventually decided that he believes in Yeshua, and doesn't prevent us from being very, very good friends. And he was in this assembly for Sukkot, and they heard the news, and they started praying and everything. And this guy shows up, and he starts talking about, skipping some details, but he started saying something about Ashkenazi Jews not being real Jews and so on. And my friend got up and just looked him in the face and confronted him and said, stop. He just told him to his face, stop. And that was something that has to be said. Stop. This is not productive. It doesn't help anyone. It doesn't bring us anywhere. It doesn't help us understand what God wants from us better. When we are focusing on ego, when we are focusing on why I'm better than others, we have gained nothing and have returned back to square one, which was one of the reasons why Israel and Judah split and why everything was destroyed.
That is true. That is very true, Joe. And, I'm just grateful that we can dialogue and have a conversation about this, because I believe 100% in me for a long time, 20 years. And I believe in perfect faith, and my faith in Yeshua. We've talked about this, never compromise that. And we accept each other for where we're at. And we both have come, and man, we've come a long way, in understanding and educating ourselves and dialogue, and talking about, you've seen the New Testament in a completely different light because you actually went out and decided to study it. And I believe in the restoration of the whole kingdom of Israel, and I get it. And I know that they are dispersed of Israel around the world. I also know that is true. But our focus should be not only for the regathering of those people, but also for to allow others who are not necessarily part of that kingdom to have a part in it by becoming part of the kingdom, if that makes sense. You cannot, for example, if you want to convert to Judaism, you cannot live as a Gentile doing Gentile things once you convert. You have to be part of the people, graft yourself into the community, be part of the way of life they do, and then they'll recognize you as, oh, he's serious, he's part of us. Well, why is it that when we come from Christianity, we want to be part of the kingdom of God, but we're not willing to say, okay, what can we learn from the local community? I'm talking about, for example, I came from Puerto Rico to the United States, and we are citizens. I'm part of the Commonwealth of the Puerto Rico, which means that I have U.S. citizenship, but I'm not a native born. But we learn English, we study English, and then I come to the United States and I grafted myself into the culture. I've learned the language, I've studied, I pay my taxes, I live as an American, although I'm not a native born, but I've been basically given the citizenship, which is a gift. I don't understand why it's so difficult for us to understand that in the kingdom of God, which we don't belong to the kingdom of God. Through Yeshua, we have access to come into the kingdom of God and be part of the commonwealth of Israel, just like Paul said that in Ephesians quite clearly, politia, citizenship. And they're not even studying that in the context of the Greco-Roman world and how citizenship was so prized in the Greco-Roman world. And I'm thinking, why do you want to go beyond that point now to say, oh, you're no longer that important, I'm better than you? Now, the problem I also have within the circle of Judaism, Messianics, is that they tell you, well, we're the Jewish people, you're a Gentile, you don't need the Torah, you don't need to do this. I have a problem with that too. It's like me telling people who come from another nation, oh, we're going to give you all the benefits of our country, but you don't need to be a citizen. You don't need to pay taxes. You don't need to be loyal to our Constitution. That makes no sense. So on both sides, we have a problem, and we're trying to understand it, but we never dialogue about it. We never talk about it. We always compete for who's right and wrong, and I got tired of that. I just want to learn to study, and I want to learn to obey. I'm sure that's the same case in Israel, in certain circles. You know, there's always that competition for honor.
Yeah, there is such a thing. You know, when I was living in when I was living in Ultra Orthodox community, first of all, I don't want to speak ill of anyone there because most of the people I knew there were wonderful. But you did have some people who felt like, you know, well, my family has been ultra Orthodox for generations upon generations, and therefore, you know, and I personally didn't grow up in that world. You know, I come from a traditional family. That's what we always were. And so there were people who were like, you know, well, you know, you're not really one of us. There were some people behaving that way. So yeah, it's about ego. And then there were other people in the community who said, just ignore that person. They just have to grow up. You know, and that's something. If we decide to raise each other up, we all benefit from it.
I agree. I agree with that. So, Joel, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate having you, having a dialogue and a conversation. I am learning a lot. I'm studying, I'm researching, I'm finding out how much I don't know. And if anybody knows me very well and see my journey the last 20 years is you, as you have helped me also, you know, in many areas to understand certain things that I didn't know because I was only focusing on certain things. You know, when the horses, they are in the race, they go like this. I've learned to take off the blinders and then, you know, be a little bit more of a researcher and to try to adapt my life to the truth of the context. And in doing so, I'm finding out how much I don't know and how far we are to have a complete picture and where we're trying to and where we're headed. But I want to thank you for being here because you being in Israel can tell us what is going on in the land, and specifically with this particular branch of Judaism that is not necessarily mainstream in Israel. It's just a branch that is creating actually more problems. As a matter of fact, I just saw a video of one of this particular group who was going in some of the Jewish communities waving a Palestinian flag, and the police was running after them. You know, it's like, it's crazy.
These guys have,
talk about bad timing.
Yeah, first of all, very bad timing. Second of all, you know, these guys have like this. They understand they are doing the right thing that God wants from them because their rabbi read something in the Talmud.
Yeah.
And now they're treating it as if this is Judaism and this is Jewish law. Well, on the other hand, when you actually look at Jewish literature, there are lots of different opinions. And you take Maimonides, for example, and he has laws about how to conduct yourself in war. You know, so.
Yeah. I hear you, man.
It's not, this guy says, you know, this is not Judaism. So he says Israel doesn't represent all Jews, but then he speaks about Judaism. He speaks about his interpretation of Judaism as if it encompasses everyone. The same way that I see, for example, you have these Jews in America who are abusing their Jew card, and now they're saying this is not Judaism. And my question is, so, I mean, each person does with it whatever they want. So this kind of strongly reminds you of what pagans used. I don't like using the term pagans, but what pagans used to do with their religion. It was you could call it like bespoke religion. You took a concept and then you made it whatever you wanted it to be.
But you know that doesn't happen only in Judaism. It also happens within Christianity,
Yeah, exactly.
And now also with the Torah community. We are becoming very sectarians too. We're going back to that. So, hey, by the way, are you getting bombed up there now in the north?
Not right now, thank God. We're keeping a cap on Hezbollah. Hamas has tried to fire a few long-range rockets to our area. Thank God they've been shot down. And I have to say something like this. I mean, I know you don't like him, but Biden has, because of what he decided to do to stand with Israel, he's probably scared Lebanon to some degree. But the concern
Man,
is,
it's about time he did one thing right.
I'm
One
not
thing
getting
right.
involved in American politics. I don't live there. Not my right to get involved and comment. That's
One
my
thing right.
role. If
He
I don't,
supported Israel. One thing. But then he donated 100 million to West Bank. Well, what have they done? Let me give $100 million to the West Bank and Gaza for humanitarian purposes. How naive. They're going to take it for terrorism. Oh, come on.
chances are that yes. I mean, you remember Arafat lined the pockets of his suits with money because he died. He died a multi-millionaire. Where did all the money come from?
I know.
The whole Palestinian Authority thing is a Ponzi scheme.
You know what gets me, bro? It's like the leader of Hamas. He's not in Gaza. He lives in Qatar.
Yeah, he lives in Qatar and he
It's
stays
like-
in he stays like a 5-star hotel and everything. Yeah,
That's amazing. And the people dying over there following his rhetoric, and he's like living in luxury. It's crazy. But that only goes to the level of
it's the concept of communism, because you have to understand the Arabs love communism. You know, they found the red communist booklet among some of the terrorists, at least from what I understood.
By the way, there's people don't realize that in World War II, one of the leading armies of the SS, they were actually Muslims. It was the Mufti of Jerusalem who gave them many ideas what to do with the Jews, and they were Muslims. That's why they were so brutal in some of the things that they did.
Yeah, well, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, who was the Mufti of Jerusalem appointed by the British, he was well known for even the Germans felt sick from him at one point.
It's
and
crazy.
It's recorded that he was yelling on Radio Berlin to continue fighting while the city was being bombed. The guy was nuts, and there was a warrant for his arrest eventually by the British because they realized they made a mistake with him.
Well, you know that right now in Germany, the level of Islam is so big that it'll be a problem pretty soon against them.
In 2019, I think it was September 2019, I was in Munich. I went to Munich because a friend of mine took me there. I was visiting Switzerland, and we went into Germany for a while. And I was surprised the amount of Arabs I saw in the streets of Munich.
Very much so. When I went to Germany, I went to the west coast of Germany when I was doing martial arts seminars, and I had to go through a particular town, and literally it was all Syrians. I felt like I was in a different country altogether.
Well, you know, I went to England last year because my family's from there. I have relatives there, and there are entire areas that, you know, if it wasn't like the Arabs there thought I was an Arab.
Right.
Because of my somewhat Mediterranean look.
Yeah.
And you know, I have a full beard, and English usually don't look like this. So I had Arabs walking up to me and saying, you know, saying to me greetings in Arabic, and because I know some Arabic, I responded. But I moved on because I didn't want them to realize I wasn't an Arab, because I didn't have the energy, because I was actually in an area where it was a lot of Arabs there.
Yeah.
And, you have entire areas where there's no longer English. You hear Arabic in the streets.
Check this out. There's an estimated 44 million Muslims in Europe, 5% of the population. And if you do some research on Islam, they have stealth jihad, they have defensive jihad, and they had offensive jihad. And the research was that every time the Muslim population makes up 3% of the population in any country they're at, they go from stealth jihad, they don't do anything, they're quiet, they're easygoing, they're nice people, into defensive jihad. Hey, we're victims, give us this. When they make up a little bit more than 3%, they move into the offensive jihad, and that's what's going to come to Europe. Huh?
Yeah, there are several books that were written. There was there are several things that I like actual researchers that demonstrate this. You know, Sweden, for example, just after we started attacking in Gaza, you can see videos of Swedish police being attacked and in rioting and so on. You know,
Yeah.
And this is, by the way, one of the reasons why this guy from this man from the video, I don't know if he's a real rabbi. They some people call themselves rabbi and they're not.
Man,
But one of the reasons is because they're afraid. They're
Right,
terrified.
there's 5.5 million Muslims in Germany alone.
Mhm.
That's crazy. Because within the population, you always have the extremists, and
Yeah.
they normally make up 10%.
And by the way, in Berlin, for example, there's been images brought up that they're marking Jewish homes.
Yeah.
Businesses. Yeah.
Crazy. Well, brother, may God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob continue to protect you guys. And thank you for your help on helping me understand certain things. And I pray that this was edifying to somebody, somehow, some way. And again, we're searching, we're looking, but when somebody tells you and somebody posts this type of videos of this somewhat Orthodox rabbi talking bad against Israel, please know that it's actually a French group that is not recognized really as legitimate, and they speak ill against the land. So may the Lord bless you guys and keep you. Thank you, Joe. Appreciate your time, man. See you soon.
Photos.